Every time you play so smooth, makes me wanna groove. The tree says groove. Every time you play so smooth.
The Seniors Matter. We're here live on Fridays at 12:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on www.rainieravenueradio.world, your South Seattle community radio station. You can also listen to us on YouTube, Facebook, Twitch TV, Twitter, and of course on the Rainier Avenue Radio website and app. We feature interviews with people that provide services or valuable information for seniors, their families, and the community. Do you need financial documents notarized? Are you a person that needs documents read to you for clarity or completion? Call me, Brenda, at Black Orchid Notary, 206-683-2636. Tell me where, I'll meet you there. Well, here we go. We got a new month, and my special guest today is LaShawnDa L. Pittman. She is a poet, an author, and many, many more talents that she have. But she's the author of Grandmothering While Black, a 21st century story of love, coercion, and survival. Welcome to the show, LaShawnDa. How are you?
I am great, Brenda. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure. We met a long time ago, like a couple years ago, probably the 2019, I think it was just before the pandemic, at the same event that you're going to be at this Sunday, which is the grandparents and now I forgot the title of it, but it's basically Grandparents Day is how we started out with for 2023. And you did a poem and you've written a book and now the book is published. And we're having little technical difficulties here.
It is all good. I teach and I have taught more online because of the pandemic. So technical difficulties are all a part of it.
You totally understand. I know you do. So listen, I'm going to ask you to tell my audience a little bit about you. And then we're going to, then I have some other questions I'd like to ask.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a professor in American Ethnic Studies and with an adjunct position in sociology at UW. And currently I'm the Joff Hanauer Endowed Professor of Western Civilization in the honors program at UW. And I have a recent book out, as you know, Grandmothering While Black, 21st Century Story of Love, Coercion, and Survival. And I'm happy to be on the other side of that.
I hear you.
Wow.
Oh my gosh. So how did you come to this subject? I mean, what inspired you to write a book about the experiences of a Black grandmother? And then also I want to know about how is a skipped generation household affect our community?
Yeah, absolutely. So I came to this topic because I was really interested in telling a story about Black women's resilience. And it was sort of a perfect storm of events, not enough time and space in this interview to talk about them. But essentially, I decided to look for a group of Black women who were dealing with immense adversity and who were faring better than we would anticipate them faring in any number of scales that measure well-being, both mental, physical, emotion, financial, and so on. And so I ended up coming up with grandmothers that were raising grandchildren, Black grandmothers that were raising grandchildren, and doing so in a skip generation households, largely because unlike in multi-generational households where the parent is still involved and maybe can navigate various institutions that are required for child rearing,
Right.
these were women who would themselves have to navigate those institutions, and so it creates an entirely different set of challenges. And it affects our communities the most because Black children are more likely than other children, with the exception of American Indian, Alaska Native children, to either be living in a home with just a grandmother and a parent, or to be raised by just a grandmother
Right.
without a parent. And so that means skip generation households. And also Black grandmothers have the distinction of not just parenting their grandchildren in skip generation households where the parent is not present, but also they're more likely to be doing so without a partner. So,
Mm.
again, entirely different set of challenges. 67% of households headed by grandmothers, skip generation households headed by grandmothers, are impoverished. And so, it's an incredible set of structural challenges.
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's hard enough to raise a family these days, and then when you're a grandparent, probably on Social Security and have Medicare coverage, and then you have to try to figure out how are you going to, if you're if you have one child, that is enough. That's a blessing. But and if you have to have more than that, you're really challenged. And I know there's other organizations around that are focusing on grandparents and helping them. And it just seems that now there's more, or maybe it's because of the pandemic that I see it more because we were forced to be in for so long and then we're out. But then there's still these other issues that come up that been there, but now they're really exposed.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, there's been an absolute uptick in the number of children who are being raised by grandparents in America in general. So, we have more grandparents raising grandchildren than at any other time in American history. Um, People are living longer,
Hmm.
both, on the other end of the life spectrum. And so, uh, grandparents will now live long enough to see their grandchildren reach adulthood in many cases, but also the set of challenges that families are facing in the sort of post civil rights era are fundamentally different. And so, this idea that we sort of made it, in fact, some people did, but also a lot of people got left behind, right?
Hmm.
So,
Yes.
we're dealing with immense, lack of housing affordability, as we know in a city like Seattle, Washington. Um, the punitive response and criminalization of drug epidemics, particularly when
Hmm.
they affect communities of color, the mass incarceration of mothers and fathers, and leaving those children behind to be raised by grandparents. And so there a whole and the concentration of the child welfare system in our communities makes the very real threat of our children ending up in the quote unquote system very real. And so I think there's a whole different set of challenges that are both adding to this increase, but also creating challenges for the families that are um, left in their wake.
I agree. I work at a high school. And in fact, I just came from there today. And there was this one young man there who he had saggy pants. But I mean, this is not just saggy pants. I mean, I thought maybe he'd been in prison or something because his pants were so low and then he had his hands in his front pocket, but not really a pocket. And and his underwear showing. And I'm saying, excuse me. I said, would you mind pulling up your pants while you're in here, please? Because he was in the office with me and I just didn't like it. But what really bothered me was the fact that with his whole demeanor, he's unless he sees the light, someone shines it on him brightly, he's not going to be successful. He's not going to be able to get a job that's going to give him benefits, um, a paycheck, and he's he's oh gosh, it just hurt my soul to see him. And I think he's a 10th grader. And it's like, brother, we need for you to learn how to do better. Pay attention. This is why you're here, so you can get educated, so you can have a chance. Because it looks like he's just going to end up in the streets. And I hope that's not going to be the case. Somewhere along the line before he graduates, he's going to see that he needs to take a different direction. But I don't know. But it just hurts my soul. And then yesterday, there was a grandmother there with her son, and they were having enrollment issues. She was there all day. She got there about 8:30 yesterday morning and did not leave until about 2 o'clock. And her grandson was like, "I'm done with this." And she said, "No, you can go outside." She said, "But I have to stay here and make sure that we get you in school and that things are situated the way they're supposed to be." And I said, "I praise you. Can I get you some water? Can I?" I was like, man, but she's one of those grandmothers that believes in we need to be educated. And so she's going to do her best to make sure her child is educated. It just, wow. It just went, wow. But that's not what we're here for. But so can you give some background on the research process that you use to conduct interviews with Black grandmothers for the book?
Yeah, I think so for this particular book, so when I was at the National Grandparents Day back in I think it was actually I can't remember what year it was at this point. I know it's where we met.
Mm.
It actually wasn't a poem. I was talking
Oh.
about it's okay. I was talking about a bigger book project, which looks at Black grandmothers carrying labor from slavery through the Great Migration. And
Mm.
so I was sort of talking about this long history and arc of Black grandmothering in America. And I think just much more empirical work needs to be done in that way, and about the significant role that Black grandmothers have played, including with what you saw at school yesterday. For this particular book, it focuses on contemporary Black grandmotherhood, because one of the things I think that's so important to understand are that this is not just Big Mama or Nana raising grandchildren like back in the day.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
They're confronting a whole different set of issues, some of which I alluded to, many of which I will talk about shortly. But for this particular book, I interviewed over 70 Black women raising their grandchildren in skip generation households on the south side of Chicago. I wanted to look at women who, again, because these families tend to be so impoverished, were also experiencing financial hardship. That was not all of the grandmothers, but that was many of them. And so I went into communities that had 40% and higher poverty rates, and blanketed the community with flyers, hit up churches, social service organizations, and so on. Conducted these 70 in-depth interviews and also did some ethnographic research. Um, and so that's what was the sort of process of doing this work. And I did 2 rounds of interviews. So one was my dissertation work, and then one set of interviews I completed during my postdoctoral fellowship at University of Michigan. And it was looking at grandmothers who are raising grandchildren 5 and under, because we know
Mm.
that grandparents tend to provide a lot of childcare in this
Yes.
country. And so what happens when Big Mama needs childcare for the
Mhm.
grandchild and her care? Like, what are her childcare options? How does she make those kinds of decisions? How is the childcare subsidy set up for or against these families? And so that was sort of the rest of the interview. So that's how I conducted research for the book.
If you're just tuning in, this is Seniors Matter. My guest today is Dr. LaShawnDa L. Pittman. Geez, this lady, she has so much going on, but I just want to say it's a privilege having you here with me today. And for my audience, I'd like to know, do you know what's the best legacy that you can give yourself and your loved ones? Join me on Zoom for a group or individual session on legacy end of life planning. So, Dr. LaShawnDa, in your opinion, what are some of the most important takeaways or lessons that readers should gain from your book, both in terms of understanding the experiences of Black grandmothers and in addressing broader issues of caregiving and social support? That's a big one.
Yeah, that is a big one. I think one of the big takeaways I would say is that the experiences of Black grandmothers raising grandchildren today deviate so much from their historic counterparts. And when I say historic, even though the historical research is what it is, and much more of what we think about when we think about historical research, it's slavery, it's Reconstruction, it's Jim Crow, it's Great Migration. What I found is that even within the families that I was studying, things had changed in a matter of a generation. You know, I look at in my own family where my mother raised some of my nieces and nephews and how much things have changed in a generation. And so I think it's really important to note that what grandmothers today are dealing with is very different than even what the women in their own families dealt with. And so it's
Yes.
different because grandchildren's circumstances have changed. I talked about some of the issues that parents are facing, and which means that those children are also facing some of those challenges or being impacted by those
Mhm.
challenges. Also, the grandchildren's circumstances includes parents' unwillingness at times to relinquish care and custody of their
Mm.
children when they are unable or unwilling to care for them. And so that's a very real issue that
Yes.
contemporary grandmothers are dealing with. I think the demand to legalize the relationship with one's grandchildren is very different. So back in the day, you could, you know, take your grandchild and enroll it in the local school and not
Yes.
think about it because the principal probably knew you anyway and raised and
Yeah.
or teachers knew your children. Um,
Right.
you could take your grandkid to the doctor and not need legal consent or medical consent, have to give medical consent. Now we live in a very bureaucratic and paper driven society. And so grandmothers, grandparents are up against the bureaucracy, the child
Right.
rearing institutional bureaucracy. And so they're often having to confront their lack of legal authority, including when that parent may want to come get that child that they can't take care of. Grandparents don't have any inherent legal rights to their grandchildren. And so, how do you stop that from happening? And so, I think those are all very real concerns. There are medical and educational consent laws in place, but it really depends on what state you live in. It depends on whether you also know about those consent laws, and they do certain things, but they don't do others. And so I think the legal piece is really important as a difference within a generation, even. And also, I'll say that because African American and American Indian, Alaska Native communities are so incredibly impacted by the child welfare system, we are the most overrepresented groups in the child welfare system nationally and most certainly in Washington state, that we also have to manage, and grandmothers also have to manage the very real threat of their grandchildren ending up in the child welfare system.
Yes. Yes.
So
Yes. That
so
is
those
so
are big
true.
takeaways, that this is not, uh, grandmothers raising grandchildren of old, and we often think about what you described in your example, getting a child enrolled in school, getting, potty training again,
Mm.
helping with homework, you know, all of that. What I argue in my book is that we also have to look at how they even create the context for providing that care.
Mm.
You know, again, when you don't have legal rights to your grandchild, how do you even create the structure for that caregiving? Now you may need legal guardianship. Can you get it? You
Right.
know, parent going to give you permission to get it? Do you have the resources to get it? Do you know the process of getting it? If your grandchild has in fact been taken by the state, which is more likely to happen to us as Black folks,
Mhm.
how are you going to like become a kinship foster parent?
Right.
Then when the child times out of the foster care system and the parent hasn't finished their permanency or reunification plan, do you adopt? Do you become a subsidized guardian? How do you make those decisions? It's a very different set of issues. And this is before we can get to enrolling the child in school,
Right.
before we can get to potty training. It is,
Yes.
how do you create the structure for grandparent caregiving today? And I assert that that is such an complex process, one that needs to be named and acknowledged and honored. And I think the brilliance and the innovativeness and the resilience that these women exhibit in having to do work in this way, not just the day-to-day raising of grandchildren, but in this way of creating the structure for the relationship is quite remarkable.
So, LaShawnDa, the doctor.
You
See,
can
because
absolutely call me
in my
LaShawnDa. Call me LaShawnDa, it is all
okay,
good.
because I said, "Oh, I'm supposed to say doctor?" Okay. And she didn't tell me to do that, folks. This is just my respect for what she has earned her title. Um, the book subtitle is a 21st century story of love, coercion, and survival. Can you explain where the coercion comes into play?
Mm, yeah, I love that question. We think about the love piece and we think about the survival piece, and those are words that, as African Americans, many of us are very comfortable with.
Hmm.
Um, my work builds on the work of a scholar, Evelyn O'Connell Glenn, who's an emeritus professor at UC Berkeley, who wrote an incredible book that influenced my thinking called Forced to Care. And one of the things she talks about is this idea of coerced care. Coerced care happens when somebody's status obligation makes them the primary person to fulfill this work. The reality is, when children are not in the care of their parents, particularly Black children and American Indian, Alaska Native children are not in the care of their parents, guess whose care they're primarily in? Grandparents.
Hmm.
So, just by being a grandparent, especially a grandmother, 63% of co-resident and primary caregivers in this country are grandmothers, are women. So, when they're not in the care of their parent, they're in the care of grandmama often. And if it's not grandparents, then it's aunt often. That's the second layer. That's the
Okay.
second safety net.
Hmm.
And so one's status as a grandparent, a grandmother, obligates them to do this work, right? And so your status obligation makes you the primary person that people are going to call when DCFS shows up in our homes. They
Yes.
call grandmama. Right?
Sure.
When the parent is in trouble, be it the father or the mother, they're calling grandmother primarily, not entirely and all the time, but primarily. That's just fact. So that's the first piece of coerced care. Your status makes you the person that does that work. Secondly, when you take on that role, it's difficult to get out of it. Why is it difficult to get out? Because the issues that parents face today are structural issues. They're not going to be solved overnight.
Nope.
Substance abuse and addiction are not going to be solved overnight. Housing affordability, as we know, is not being solved overnight. A lack of living wages is not being solved overnight. Mass incarceration and racial disparities in mass incarceration is not being solved overnight. So you're more likely to have difficulty opting out of that role. Thirdly, once you're inside of that role, it starts to, um, for lack of a better word, it results in the loss of personhood and identity,
Mm.
right? And so what often
Yes.
happens, I find, is that we know that this work is not easy because if you watch anybody around you do it, like I watched my mother do it, it's not easy work. We know that, but what we often don't think about is that, wow, what did this woman want for herself?
Yes. She's
Imagine that.
denying herself to
Yes,
give to you.
exactly. Imagine that Big Mama also got dreams,
Hmm.
right?
Yes.
Imagine that, there are also other things um, that she cares about and wants to do. For many of the young grandmothers in my book, they were looking forward to an empty nest, and here they go with an infant all over again.
Yeah.
For the elder grandmothers in my book, they were looking forward to retiring and moving to senior housing, and they can't sell houses. They can't give up bigger apartments because they have to worry about whether their grandchildren are going to have a place to stay. They want to tend to their health, right? For often what will they will sacrifice to make sure that their grandchildren get to the doctor and make sure that their grandchildren get their needs met are their own dreams, well-being, and so on. And so the loss of personhood and identity is real. And then lastly, there are no good options, right? So it's like I'm not going to leave
Oh,
you with a
right.
parent that can't raise you
Hmm.
or won't raise you. And
Because you
I'm not
deserve to have a chance in this world.
that part. As a lot of the grandmothers in my book say, they didn't ask to be here.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
and I'm also not gonna let you go into the system. And so that's what the coerced piece looks like. That's coerced care. What I argue is that in addition to that, the grandmothers experience what I call coerced mothering. They're being
Mhm.
asked to fulfill the social and legal functions of motherhood without the legal rights.
Yes, that's not
So
fair.
yeah, and they have to deal with parents to get those legal rights, and they have to
Mhm.
deal with the state to get those
Mm.
legal rights because both parents and the state are the only entities, people that have those inherent legal rights. And so that's the coerced piece, and it shapes caregiving in very real ways that we don't think nearly enough about.
Boy, you have said a lot, I tell you. And I only have 2 minutes left. So I want to talk about the fact that you're going to be at the Grandparents' Day event at the Northwest African American Museum this coming Sunday from 2 to 4 p.m. It is free to get in. There's going to be one of the sponsors is AARP. And just to let you know, we do have a Seattle chapter. I happen to be the president of it. And we're going to be there along with a number of other members of the community. So we look forward for all of you to come out and support us. And you will really enjoy this. Oh, by the way, did I say there's food? There's food. So
And
come on.
really good food too.
And really good food. Yes, yes, absolutely. So come on over after church and just listen to a great program and get a little food in your stomach. Oh, wow. So one more thing. What future research or projects are you planning in this field? And how do you envision building on the insights gained from writing this book? And where can we find the book?
I will be at the event on Sunday. I'm excited to go back, and I'm not going to be the keynote speaker this year, so I get to support whoever is in that position. I'll be selling my book on Sunday. You can
Okay.
also order it. You can go to my website, drlashawndapittman.com. There's links there to buy the book. Amazon has it. I try to use other spaces to buy it. I'll just say that, but you can
I
get it from
understand.
Amazon. And I mentioned earlier the historical book, which I'm really super excited about. So it'll be the first empirical book written that focuses on Black grandmothering, beginning in slavery through the Great Migration. I'm also working on a health intervention for grand families because, again, I mentioned and alluded to, often grandmothers sacrifice their own health to do the work that they do to raise another generation. And so I'm working with a colleague to intervene on the stress that they experience, hopefully sort of reducing some of the stress of the family unit.
Right.
And then lastly, my archive devoted to Black grandmothers, real Black grandmothers, I'm excited to be coming back to. It's a space where you can get a sense of who Black grandmothers really are. We tend to be, y'all tend to be, they tend to be romanticized, pathologized, and caricaturized. And so this is a great space to get firsthand accounts of insight into Black grandmothers in a real way and in a nuanced way.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I look forward to seeing you on Sunday. We can talk more.
I'm looking
Don't
forward to it as
forget,
well.
folks, the 2023 Metro League football season has beginning tonight. It's Chiefs South at Lakeside at 5 p.m. and Lincoln, number 6, Garfield at 7:45, both at Memorial Stadium. Thank you for listening and viewing. Thank you, Miss Willie Stewart, for your comments. I love you. I will see you on Sunday too. Thank you to my guest once again, Dr. LaShawnDa L. Pittman, and a special thank you to singer Patrice Isley. Have a great weekend. Be safe and live your life like it's golden. Bye.